This is Larry Magid, the host of Connect Safely Live, joined as always by Kerry Gallagher, our Director of K-12 Education. Hi, Kerry.
Hi, Larry. Great to see you again.
And our guest today is an old friend of mine. Not that he's that old, but we've been friends for a long time. I think since the 80s, Philippe, when you were at Borland International many careers ago, or same career, many jobs ago, when you were the CEO of Borland. Philippe is best known, I guess, as the father of the camera phone. And that's a long story about how he invented a camera phone so he could take a picture of his daughter when she was being born about, what, 22 years ago? Is that right?
That's 22 years ago. That's right.
See, I've known him even longer than that. But he's currently CEO of Fullpower Technologies, which is a company that makes sleep technology, among other things. And he's also done work with digital watches. He's had an amazing career. But we're talking to him because of the sleep technology. Sleep is such an important part of people's lives always. And in this particular moment, it's particularly important because, as I'm sure Philippe can explain better than I, it builds up your immune system. So with that as an introduction, Philippe, talk about the importance of sleep.
Well, sleep is a third of our lives. We spend a third of our lives sleeping on the average, about eight hours a day out of 24. So it's very important. And people, you think of sleep as the deep ocean. You know what's at the surface, but you don't know what's underneath. And in fact, science knows very little about sleep because it's very difficult to investigate sleep when people actually sleep. We go to sleep labs and we got a lot of electrodes put on and we can analyze a lot of stuff. But what we're analyzing there is disrupted sleep and actually what happens when we sleep. And from an evolutionary standpoint, what does sleep really mean? Why do we sleep? And what happens? I mean, how did people sleep 1,000 years ago? How did people sleep 200 years ago? And how do we sleep today? And how can we improve the quality of our sleep? It's just like similar to what happens with performance. If you bike, you run, you surf, or whatever you do, sleep is kind of the same idea, is that you can improve the performance of your sleep. And that's really what's really important when it relates to the immune system, because there's something that research tells us is if you have quality sleep, you have a stronger immune system. If you have a stronger immune system, you have better chances to do better in any kind of disease, and in particular, this particular pandemic.
So Philippe, I don't have any electrodes on me when I sleep, but thanks to you, I do have these two pads under my mattress, one on my side of the bed, the other on my wife Patty's side of the bed. And we do every morning after we wake up, get some sleep data. And that is your product, and I'd love you to talk about it a little bit.
Well, what we built is basically a sleep lab in the home. So instead of building consumer technology, we built, med tech grade technology, and we are scientists, researchers. Fullpower is a med tech company. We're actually working on FDA clearance of our solution right now, and so a little different from your sleep tracker on your watch or whatever it is. What we built is really a system that helps you understand, give you some of the metric. We're limited by what some of our partners do, like for example, Tempur-Pedic is a major partner of ours, and they are going to release snore monitoring, understanding how can you minimize snore, et cetera, what's the impact of snore, et cetera. So they're doing great work like that in actually moving from just saying, you need a better mattress to you need better sleep, and this is how you can get to it. And of course you need a better mattress, you give you a better pillow. But until now, all that's been about selling mattresses and pillows, and ultimately that's important. But more importantly, it's really important to be a sleep company and help people sleep better so that they can strengthen their immune system and improve their wellness.
Philippe, I'm wondering what you know so far. It sounds like there's still so much to learn, right, based on the tech that you've developed. But a lot of us are experiencing quite a bit of stress right now because of an unpredicted change to the way we live. So how does stress affect sleep? What do we know about that?
What we know is that stress affects sleep significantly. In fact, we know a lot about what happened between the before shelter in place and after shelter in place. In fact, we have tens of thousands of sleepers every night, and actually we've ran some infographics and I posted some of it. So I'll give you a big picture thing. What's interesting is that since shelter in place, both females and males are sleeping more. The duration of sleep is more, but duration doesn't equate to quality. And so there are more phases than 2 phases of sleep, but the two most important ones that we should remember are REM sleep, which is basically when we dream and we rejuvenate our brains. And then the other one is deep sleep. And deep sleep is when we rebuild our system, where we generate human growth hormones and help rebuild our system. Well, what's really interesting and part of the answer to your question is that although we sleep longer, we get more REM sleep, which means more dream sleep, but we get actually on the average less deep sleep. And we believe that that's a direct consequence of stress. Because we are more stressed, we're actually dreaming more. Some people call it nightmares. I mean, you know, a dream is a dream is a dream, and depends what you make of it. But we actually get less restorative, whatever you call that. You know, I'm French, so my English is not so good. So we get a little less of restoration through our sleep by getting less deep sleep. And what's really important if you want to improve the quality of your sleep is to get more deep sleep, and then we can try to understand, you know, are there some ways to get more deep sleep, and how can we help people get more deep sleep so to actually minimize the effect of stress, et cetera. Because when there's stress, everybody knows it suppresses the immune system. If it suppresses the immune system, it triggers certain reactions. So if you get in contact with a COVID-19 type of disease, you may react to it not as well. I mean, it's a long answer, you know.
So just if I can show
no.
this, just real quick, this is my app. This is my last night. Philippe, do you want to diagnose me based on what you can see here? Can you read this?
I don't do diagnosis. I'm a scientist.
I know you're not a medical doctor, but
what the data shows, and no, it's not being a medical doctor here. I can tell you, you don't get enough deep sleep just by looking at it.
Yeah.
So you got more than 6 hours of sleep, which is good. I'd be happier if you got 7 hours of sleep. Oh, your screen turned off.
Uh-oh. Let me go back up. There we go.
You got quite a bit of REM sleep, 2 hours and 14 minutes. So that's way off the charts. So to me, that would tell me that it'd be important to get some more deep sleep, and there are many reasons why you may get that. You know, that would be my first picture.
So then the question is I'm not asking for necessarily personal advice, but I suspect other people have similar, as you mentioned, this is a trend right now. What can people do to get that additional deep sleep?
You're not going to like my answer. Stop drinking wine, stop having alcohol, stop smoking cigarettes, stop consuming substances and stuff like that.
I don't do any of those, by the way. I have not had a glass of wine since the pandemic began.
Well, you know, we're all different, but I'm just giving you general guidelines for people.
Yeah. Caffeine, I do drink. What about caffeine?
Cut caffeine. I mean, if you can, that's a really big one, especially after 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Just avoid that. And I love caffeine. I mean, I'm
French.
a person who can have 20 espressos a day, but I don't, because if I have 20 espressos, I have them before 2 p.m. because I need to take time. The other thing you need to do is focus on, what we see as a direct correlation of getting more deep sleep is getting more high intensity exercise as opposed to aerobics exercise.
Oh.
A lot of people are focused on endless aerobic exercise, et cetera, which is good, it's better than nothing. But, you know, start truly lifting weights, start getting strength and doing things that really challenge your immune system. And that's really what happens. So as human beings, we're products of evolution, really. And evolution is about adaptation. You know, Darwin said to paraphrase Darwin, said the great Darwin, it said, you know, the species that survive are not the strongest or the smartest, they're the ones that are most responsive to change. So that applies to a little bit to everything you do. So the more adaptation you trigger by not doing the same thing every day, by varying what you do, by varying your exercise, by, you know, lifting weight, doing high intensity stuff, that adventure side of exercise, the more you will adapt, the more you'll trigger your system. And what we find in looking at athletes who actually perform that way, they get deeper sleep, they get more restorative sleep. And that's one of the challenges you have with sleep nowadays, is that, you know, you see all this advice you get from people that says, you gotta sleep, you know, 8 hours, 10 hours and all that. And, you know, that's the length of sleep is important, but we have to be realistic. We are all conditioned by, you know, we only have so much time to sleep because we have kids, we have pets, we have work, we have all that. And so you can't tell people, like, you know, just like you tell people in order to lose weight, you know, eat less. Great. That's great advice. What am I going to do about that? Sleep more. Well, that's great. And you try and it doesn't work. What you need to focus on is to say, you know, you had 6 hours and a half of sleep, which is pretty good because that's actual sleep. That's not being in bed. You probably were in bed about 8 hours. But that's pretty good, 6.5 hours of sleep. Now, what you need to focus is on the quality of your sleep, like everything else. It's not about how much you sleep, it's how well you sleep. And what's the quality of your sleep? Do you eat anything 2 hours before you're going to bed? If you do, that's going to interrupt your sleep because, you know, your digestive system is competing with all the rest of your systems in your body. And so, but is that possible? You know, if you have kids and you have to go to bed at 9 p.m. and, you know, can you have finished eating at 7 p.m.? So all this, it needs adaptation. It needs actually everybody's different, and we need to be flexible and understand that what's important is the quality of your sleep. And to measure the quality of your sleep, you need to have a balance between deep sleep, REM sleep, etc.
So Philippe, I have a follow-up question for you, because there are lots of things that we tell ourselves and that society tells us are important about sleep. And I wonder if you can kind of confirm or debunk some of these things. So for instance, I have an 8 and an 11-year-old, and I remember it was only a few years ago that I was sleep training them, and I have a sister who has toddlers, and under these circumstances, predicting their sleep routine has been nearly impossible because they're in the same place all day. There is really no daily routine, right? So one thing that we've been taught is that a before you go to bed routine is very important, that you do the same things every night to start giving your body signals that it is time to rest. How important is that? And does that affect the quality of your sleep at all?
There is absolutely no proof that everything that everyone is saying is true. I mean,
that's what I thought.
There's a bunch, and you know, and it's true. I mean, it's like I work with a lot of sleep specialists, you know, in the medical profession and all that. Everybody's got a different opinion. If you think about how people used to sleep in shifts. If you read the history books, with wake up, work for 2 hours, or do whatever they had, and get back to sleep. Then other people would not do that. If you were one of the 0.1% of aristocrats in the 18th century, you slept in a bed. If you were any one of the other people, you slept in a closet. You didn't even have a bed. You had a communal bedroom with 20 people who have kids. And so we're a product of that. If you were in the Stone Age, and we're not that different from that, you know, some of us had to sleep standing up pretty much with weapons next to us, listening for the saber-toothed tiger to make sure that it wouldn't show up in our cave and eat everybody up. And so we'd have graveyard shift, basically, or what you'd call this today. And it explains a lot how genetically some of us are different. In fact, there's a Stanford study that shows there's a gene that differentiates a lark from an owl, which is a lark is someone who wakes up really early in the morning, and an owl who likes to work at night and be at night and then wake up later. And we tend to force everybody in the same schedule. So one of the interesting things about shelter in place that I see, we have lots of our colleagues who work in our company who have young kids. Some have a 2, 3, and a 5-year-old. Otherwise, have toddlers and all that. And we see that all the time. And shelter in place has allowed people to relax the schedule that is literally imposed by work, by the school, et cetera, because we get all put in that mold, which, you know, is necessary in a society. But this is a very interesting experiment. And we see that in the sleep, you know, we anonymize all the data. We have tens of thousands of sleepers, and we see those changes in shelter in space. People who would always wake up at a different time, at the same time, because they went to bed at the same time, and they had to take their kids to school and go to work. Now suddenly their schedule has shifted, which is really interesting, right.
Yeah.
And we did a little research on those, and we found that there were actually owls that were forced into a lark schedule, and that had an impact on them, because, you know, there's a couple of studies out there that shows that when such people who were forced to be larks all their life because they had to go to work, retire, then they return their schedule, because naturally they tend to live more at night and sleep in. So
I
have
a quick question. So the discussion of owls and larks is really important, but I also know a lot of people label themselves like heavy sleepers or light sleepers. What's your take on that?
There are light sleepers and heavy sleepers, and to me, so it's very difficult to understand. You know, there's a lot of people who do some research about that. But here's some interesting thing. There's some genetics about that. If you use a system like 23andMe and all that, they will tell you whether you have a tendency to be a light or heavy sleeper, but you probably know. And what's really interesting is that I believe there's an evolutionary potential reason for that. Some of us were probably agriculturists, and some of us were more hunters and et cetera. And maybe the hunter kind were a little more light sleepers because they were listening to predators, and the agricultural, background people were, heavy sleepers because they had to do a lot of heavy work every day, et cetera. So you know how genetics and epigenetics, create some evolutionary pattern. But what's really important is when you know you're a light sleeper, don't fight it. You're a light sleeper. That's it. You don't need to take drugs and et cetera to do that. In fact, people who take Ambien and all that, and I'm going to make a lot of enemies in the pharma industry right now, but all the studies that have been done showing that, it has lots of side effects, and the only difference it does, it makes you sleep about 10 minutes more, increases your REM sleep and decreases your deep sleep. So, and with kids, what do you do with young kids? And one of the reasons, there's several reasons we got interested in sleep, but one of the reasons we got interested in sleep is we had a daughter that wouldn't sleep. The daycare would call us up. We both worked, and said, she didn't want to go to sleep. Go pick her up. And she just absolutely didn't want to sleep. So at that time, I met someone called Chloe Stumpe, who ran the lab of chronobiology at Harvard Medical School, who's a sleep specialist at the time. And so he came, and we're both, offshore sailors, so that we had something in common. And so he came and spent a couple of months with us in Santa Cruz one summer, in the break. And he put a lot of sensors on our daughter. And at the end, he said, there's nothing wrong with her. She's just fine. And she just doesn't like to be told to go to sleep at this time. And if she's going to fight every time, it's not going to work. And she's perfectly fine. Today she's a student, and a very good student at NYU, doing great. And she's a great kid, and it wasn't bad for her. I mean, so we're all different. And people fight the kids' schedules. Kids are going to have a crazy disrupted disrupted sleep pattern, especially when they become teenagers. Wait till yours becomes teenagers, then
I
you'll.
have a big question about that because I actually work as an assistant principal at a school for adolescents, and we're finding under these remote circumstances that our students' sleep patterns have shifted drastically. They're not getting up until 10 or 11 in the morning, and they're going to bed at midnight or 1 o'clock. And so our teachers who are trying to teach remotely and get them to get up and come to Zoom meetings like this to come to class, right? They're not getting any attendance when they hold the class between 8 and 10 a.m. So what should I tell those teachers about the biology behind that and how they can adjust to really meet the needs of their students?
I would tell them, hold your classes at noon and
Yeah,
later. It's just as
that's
simple as
what I
that.
thought.
And,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and, and I think that's, it's really interesting because France is having an interesting situation. I'll get back to that in a second, but really, I mean it. A lot of kids do not do well going to school at 8 a.m. and in the first few hours of school. Some kids do well and some of them don't. I know my daughter didn't do well. I did fine. I can go both ways. But a lot of kids would rather have their class at noon and later and sleep in and do everything they have. And frankly, it's much better for their health, for their immune system and all that. They'll get more sleep. If you force them to get up at 8, they'll still go to bed at midnight. And even if you think they don't, they're in their room, they're under the covers with a smartphone, whatever it is, and they're not sleeping. So, hey, it's simple. Start school later. Now all this has been conditioned by the fact that, if you're a parent and you have a job that starts at 8 a.m. or 9 a.m., then you have to get your kid to school because otherwise, where's your kid going to be, and et cetera. But shelter in place is teaching us a lot of that because obviously, there's a lot of freedom there. Now, there are kids who want to get up at, first thing, but teenagers in particular, I would start the classes at noon or whatever it is. And that's really, and I know a couple of students who are past teenagers in college, in good colleges, who now have all their online classes. And I can tell you, they're taking their online classes in bed, no one knows. And they're doing just fine, but they just saved themselves a couple of hours of getting up, taking a shower.
So Philippe, we talked a little bit about quality of sleep and length of sleep, but what about duration in the sense of whether do you need to have it all at once? So what if you wake up early, for example, the phone rang at 6 in the morning, you woke up early and you only got 4 hours sleep that night or 6 hours sleep? Should you take a nap? Or in general, does it make sense perhaps to spend less time in bed at night and to take a nap in the afternoon or whenever you feel you need it?
Power naps are great. And if you can take them, that's great. In fact, if you look at longevity of people, some of the people with the most longevity in the world right now are people in Spain. And if you go to Spain, I'm sure you went to Spain and you know that, you can't go to a restaurant before 10 p.m.
Right.
Nobody goes to bed before 1 a.m. and everybody takes a siesta. In fact, a siesta, the word siesta means seis, it comes from the number 6, and it's the effect you see when you wake up about 6 hours later, you feel sleepy. And that's why it was called a siesta, because it's about 6 hours after you wake up. And taking a siesta at that time is great if you can do it. And
is there a particular length of time that's ideal for a siesta? How long should you nap for?
Okay, so there's different opinions about that. So sleep is made of cycles, and each cycle triggers, it's just you go from stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. The hormonal system modifies itself as you move from cycle to cycle. And so if you interrupt a given cycle, you feel groggy. And this is why sometimes you take a nap that's 20 minutes and you feel rested. You take a nap that's 33 minutes and you feel groggy. Is because you jumped into a different cycle. So if you want to be really scientific about it, you can analyze, and everybody's a little different, how long your cycles are. And on the average, it's about 22, 23 minutes for the first cycle. And so if you have if you have a nap that's about 25 minutes or all that, it's just fine. You'll naturally wake up. But if you keep on sleeping, it's a good idea to go for a second cycle, which might take you around 44, 45 minutes. But all this gets customized because everybody is different. There's no cookie cutter approach, but you can experiment with it. And in fact, your sleep quantification may help you figure that out. For me, it's about 23.5 minutes. And we experimented with that. It's very difficult to experiment with that because a lot of people don't want to be woken up and all that. We experimented with that when we were offshore sailing for a long time, shorthanded, and that's where my friend Claudio Stumpy, who is a specialist, really wrote a lot about polyphasic and monophasic sleep. And so when you only sleep a cycle, that's what's known as monophasic sleep, and as opposed to several cycles when you get all those polyphasic cycles. So it's a great idea if you haven't slept much, if you can take a nap. And in fact, right now we all work at home, but my colleagues and partners at work know that sometimes they see me sleeping on the floor.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that for 20 minutes because I only slept 4.5 hours and I want to do that. So I'll take 1 or 2 naps like that. And one of the best things that people do, I was talking to someone who had a few conditions, and he was complaining that he was falling asleep when he was watching movies and then going to sleep. And I said, well, that's great. Keep on falling asleep and getting those naps while you're watching movies because, that's actually helping us. But that doesn't count as my sleep. Yes, it does. But, think about it as, wow, great. I missed a movie, but I took a 25-minute nap. That's a great thing to do. And a lot of people do that,
That's gratifying because it's Patty. I do that all the time at night, falling asleep in front of the television or watching a movie. What about the situation you wake up at 3 a.m. and you just can't sleep? Should you stay in bed and kind of just do whatever you can, or should you get up and maybe take a nap later or go back to bed later?
Well, there are different opinions about that. I tell you what I do and what I've learned that works for me. I get out of bed and I go work out or I go do whatever I do, and then boom, I sleep like a baby. But if I try to roll and toss in bed, personally, I'm not happy. I'm just like, I gotta sleep. It becomes a stress thing. Get stressed because you can't sleep. Oh my God, I can't sleep. What's going to happen? I'm going to feel bad tomorrow. And you just stop it. You say, hey, I can't sleep. That's what's happening. And so then you could do. It depends if you're stressed because of personal reasons and all that, and something has happened. Whatever at work or personally or something like that, then probably working out and breaking a good sweat, lifting some heavy weights will help. But if you want to work, you just go out and work. If you like to play the piano or an instrument, you go do that. And then an hour and a half later, 2 hours later, sometimes you go back to bed and you sleep.
And what about devices at night? And is there any kind of a screen, whether it's a TV, a computer, or a smartphone? And is there a difference, for example, sitting in front of the television watching a movie versus scrolling through your Facebook feed on your phone or your computer in terms of its impact on sleep?
Well, there is obviously a difference. I mean, I'm going to ask you the question. You answer that question. If you're sitting with Patty watching a movie and you fall asleep, you fell asleep.
Because that's passive, yeah.
If you're doing Facebook all the time, when's the last time you fell asleep on Facebook?
Right, I don't, because it's active versus passive.
There's your answer. I don't need to answer that question. You answer it for yourself. I mean, obviously one keeps you awake, the other one puts you to sleep.
And what about the whole notion of the blue light and the screens, just the mere fact that you're in front of a screen? Like you mentioned, you sometimes go to work, and I assume you probably work in front of a screen. Is that screen going to affect your ability to sleep later?
I'm an engineer and I'm a programmer, so I do program. But I wear this.
Blue light glasses.
That has special glasses, and I use them, and that really helps. I mean, I find that really helps. Even if I wake up at night and I go somewhere and all that, I wear these because I can actually work and do things. but I wear those. So
Those are blue light glasses, I presume. Is that what they're called?
these
If you want to
are,
order.
yeah, that's what they do, but they're, yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
yeah. A lot of our teachers, because we're spending so much more time in front of screens than we were before under these circumstances, have blue light glasses have been selling out on Amazon. I know that because they've become very popular. So I have a question for you. Don't tell anyone, but I'm going to turn 40 this year. And so one of the things I've been thinking about is essentially I'm like reaching middle age. And so how can I expect sleep to change for me as I get older over the next couple of decades? I don't have children waking me up in the middle of the night anymore. They're a little bit older, so I'm past that stage. But what can I expect?
Well, first, everything changes, in life from toddler to whatever age you are. So there's no question about it. That's part of the aging process. So for both females and males, something changed, but there's something that changes a lot with females is premenopause and menopause. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the key changes in premenopause and menopause in females is disrupted sleep. So there's no question about that. We see that with our tens of thousands of users. If you look at females, you look at age group, you find significantly disrupted sleep, premenopause, menopause, and then past menopause, it becomes kind of renormalized. So that's a changing in hormonal systems, and it has a big impact. So you need to know that and expect that, and then that's a different issue. Then that's something you have to discuss with your
Yeah.
your
Are there things that women can do to help counteract that? Like, like you said, weight bearing and strenuous exercise, or
Sure.
trying to go to bed at the same time every night or anything like that? Or is it sort of unavoidable and it's going to be a rough patch and you just have to get through it?
I think it's unavoidable, but it's controllable. And so
Mm-hmm.
everybody, and men go through through andropause, whatever they call it. So there's no question that high intensity exercise, avoiding crazy carbs and trying to have a very wholesome diet and et cetera will make a big difference, and especially if you can do high intensity exercise. Weight bearing exercises makes a big difference. We see that in the data. We see the people, the people who remain. There's people who were athletes as they were kids and then they stop, and that's not good. And people who remain actually athletic or athletes during their whole life, it's amazing what it does and how it helps people go through those changes that are unavoidable. I mean, there are changes unavoidable. It's the same thing with COVID-19. People says, well, older people are more susceptible to get it. Yeah, the older you get, the more likely you are to die. And if there is a pandemic, the more likely we are to die. I'm much more likely to die from that than you are, and that I'm older than you are. But that's normal. But what you could do is through your lifestyle, and what you do is mitigate all that. But that's really from a female standpoint, we see that very clearly in premenopause, menopause, and then postmenopause. We see the changes, and we see some people who have a hard time. And we're trying to do a study, but it's hard to get that data. It has to be volunteer. There's some, where are there real benefits in that in hormone replacement therapy, which is a lot of females use, and is that something that helps actually long term, or is that just a short term patch? We're trying to do some clinical studies about that, but we don't have answers to that yet.
Philippe, you've mentioned exercise several times. There are some people who say you shouldn't exercise a couple of hours before sleep. What is your sense about at what point you should stop exercising relative to your bedtime?
I don't agree with that at all.
Okay.
It doesn't work for me. The more I exercise before sleep, the better I sleep.
So you could go exercise and go right to sleep.
It's not really aerobic, what people call aerobic exercise. It's really, short, high intensity exercise, pull-ups, push-ups, stuff like that, back squats, stuff like that, and stuff that really trigger human growth hormone secretion. I think that's very important.
So that's interesting that human growth hormone production happens both in deep sleep and when doing high intensity exercise. So both of those can help with the production of that particular hormone.
Absolutely. And in fact, if you think about it, something like a deadlift, a heavy deadlift, which is a very simple exercise that dates back to the Greeks and the Romans and the Hebrews and whatever, where they had contests of how much you could weight, who could lift that rock or whatever it is. Research shows that it triggers the production of human growth hormone naturally.
And just to remind our audience, what is the benefit of that production of human growth hormone? Why is that something we want?
Well, human growth hormone helps basically rebuild. It's the fountain of youth, really. As you get older, you generate less and less. You get wrinkles, you get all that, and your body starts to break down and all that. And so there's a lot of people who inject that, and that's potentially dangerous. That's actually, in some ways, Lance Armstrong got disqualified by using a lot of that stuff because it really helps. But if you can generate human growth hormones naturally through natural processes, that's perfectly legal, perfectly good for you, and probably a great idea, and it works. And it is truly the fountain of youth. And it's not something that comes from a pill or anything else. It's not something that anyone can do for you, any law, it's something you have to do. You have to go lift that weight.
And I assume you start out with whatever you can handle and then work your way up like any other form of strength exercise.
Absolutely. I mean, the whole idea is that always start from where you are. Don't start from where you were 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Or where you want to be, because you'll get hurt.
Right.
And deadlift, when you're doing deadlifts too, Larry, form is really important. So it's important to work with a trainer if you've never done them before to make sure you stack your bones and your alignment properly.
Well, these days,
otherwise you'll pull a muscle.
The only trainer that I'll allow into my house is via YouTube. So
there are plenty out there.
Yeah, that's true. You can hire them. And one last thing, Philippe.
I'll be scared by, there's so much crap on YouTube where everybody thinks they can learn anything from an app or from YouTube. And people are so wrong about that. There's an app for that, or there's a YouTube video for that. There are people who are great coaches, and that's a much better way to go after it. It's very important to learn these things properly.
But even on YouTube, you can pick and choose who you're listening to. For example, my wife needed physical therapy and didn't want to go get it because of the COVID situation. She found a YouTube video from the National Health Service of the UK specific to her particular fracture, and it was fantastic. And she had one of her physical therapist friends look at it and verified this is actually great advice. And she wound up doing her own therapy based on credible data via YouTube. So you have to pick and choose your YouTube. We have to get going pretty soon, but I am interested in this notion of sleep deprivation, how you know you have it if you have it, and what are the consequences, and again, what you can do about it. I know that's going over some old ground, but probably a good way to end.
Well, if every time you go, and I think I did that in your meeting at your high school, you ask people who's sleep deprived and who's not. Every time you have a big meeting, and the answer is everybody raises their hand. There's always a smart ass that says, no, I slept too much, but that's a smart ass in the room. The bottom line is we live in a sleep deprived society where we're forced to get up at a certain time, etc. We don't naturally wake up at a time. And so what Kerry was talking about, when she was talking about, teenagers who were sleeping in, is like, oh, finally they wake up naturally at 10 o'clock, not when they have to. And that kind of de-stresses them. So when you're deprived, you get stressed. When you get stressed, a lot of bad things happen. And sleep deprivation is a cause of stroke, is a cause of atrial fibrillation, is a cause of constipation, is a cause of diabetes potentially, and all these things. And it's we all deprive, and so the question is, what can you do about it? And I think Larry, you talked about naps are great. You're sleep deprived. Get a nap. That's better for you than watching episode 27 from Game of Thrones.
Okay, so I want to give you a chance to put in a little plug for your product. You've been great about not promoting the product, and thank you. But I do want people to know how they can get a hold of Sleep Tracker and what it does, because it's important. It is. I have it, and I really find it to be very useful.
Yeah, well, you can't buy it. It's a solution that's from Tempur-Pedic. They're a leading quality bedding company, and so you actually can't buy it directly right now. We're working with a couple of medical companies who are looking at selling as a medical solution. So you can't really buy it. One of our prior customers, Beauty Rest, sold a few copies, but it's not something you can buy. But there's a few solutions, by the way, you can, especially in the days of shelter in place, you can do, improve your bedding, and that's something we didn't talk about. You spend 8 hours a night on a bed, and you go and buy some kind of a bed in a box compressed foam, made in some factory that is full of chemicals and all that, and you spend 8 hours on top of that without even thinking about it, and you spend $50,000 maybe, or buying a car and you spend an hour in it, or probably no time in it right now, or very little time, and you just you won't spend more than $600 or $700, or sometimes $300 buying a crap mattress on which you're going to spend a third of your life on, and it's kind of sad, because that's part of the quality of sleep, and like a company so they're high-end Tempur-Pedic, high quality stuff, but yeah, it costs a few $1,000s, but that's an important investment in the quality of your sleep, because we're looking at organic foods and all that, and why aren't we looking at the quality of the bed technology that we're sleeping on, et cetera? And so that's another important way to improve the quality of your sleep, and not sleep on a piece of plastic or something.
Okay, well, go out and get a good mattress. Great advice. Philippe Kahn, I want to thank you very much for taking the time. I learned a lot, and I'm very excited that people are watching this on Facebook right now, and we're going to be sharing it on other platforms. If anybody wants to watch this again or recommend it to a friend, you can go to ConnectSafely.org/live, and you'll find an archive of this and all of our programs right there to enjoy later on. Philippe, thanks so much for taking the time, and as always, thanks so much, Kerry.
Yeah, thanks, Philippe. I learned that now I understand why all my coworkers are saying they're sleeping more and yet they're still tired. Now I can tell them the answer is the difference between deep sleep and REM sleep. So thanks for that.
And I learned I'm going to start working out with weights again.
You guys. Okay. Have a nice afternoon.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.